I'm Leah. I have been a physician assistant doing cardiac surgery for the last 18 years. Last spring, I went through a particularly rough spell where every single time I was on call, I had something horrible happen, keeping me away from my family, events, and my kids. And I remember specifically one Tuesday where I would spend the entire day just praying that God would let me get out of work on time so that I didn't miss something else. And then I got a phone call from a nurse. She called saying that a patient I had supposedly discharged earlier in the day was not feeling well. He looked sick. He was in the hospital for a very long stay after surgery and was ready to go to rehab that morning, but his ride was late. So I went to see him, and when I got there, I realized something horrible had happened. His blood pressure was low. He just didn't look right. And whenever I examined him, he had right in the middle of his chest where his heart surgery had been, a hole that was just pouring blood. So I put my finger on the hole and calmed the patient down, all the while telling the nurse to please call the surgeon. When the surgeon came, he agreed that something catastrophic must have happened and we needed to go back to the operating room, but somebody needed to talk to the family. They became teary-eyed, obviously, and they cried, and I cried with them, and they asked what they could do. And I told them, honestly, they needed to start praying, that the only thing that could save their family member was prayer. And I left and went to the operating room. When we got into surgery, there was blood everywhere. Parts of his heart had fallen apart since surgery, and nothing was holding together. At one point, I even looked at the surgeon and said, "I'm not sure we can even save this man." And he looked across the table at me and said, "We still at least have to try." So for the next 6 to 8 hours, we spent operating on this man, praying all the while that somehow things would go back together and somehow we could save his life. After about 6 to 8 hours, when we thought we'd done just about everything that we could do, we took him to the critical care unit so that at least he was stable enough for his family to come and see him. We explained to them that if anything were to start bleeding again or if he took a turn for the worse, there would be nothing more we could do, no further life-saving procedures, but that this at least gave them time to be with him. And we left. And the next morning, the patient was still alive. And it was kind of unbelievable. But a few days went by, and I got a phone call on one of my days off from a coworker saying somebody wanted to speak to me. I couldn't imagine who from work would want to speak to me on my day off, but I answered the phone and I heard the 3 most wonderful words you could ever hear. In a raspy, hoarse voice, I heard, "Thank you, Leah." And it was that patient who was not only alive, but he had been taken off the breathing machine. He was now breathing on his own and up and moving around. He was really alive, and it was truly a miracle. There is no medical reason why he should have survived that surgery or what had happened to him. It was all God. I mean, this story has absolutely nothing to do with me or the surgeon involved. I prayed for half the day that I wouldn't even be there at the time that something like this would happen, but God used me where I was. Miracles do occur. I have seen it.
What a story. What a story. We have been in this series called Jesus Part 2, and Jesus Part 1 happened in the spring, and that was about his followers. Jesus Part 2 has been about his miracles, and these are some of the most, in some ways, controversial places in the Bible, depending on where you're coming from. So our church, listen, our whole goal here is to help you find and follow Jesus, because we believe that that's the best that life has to offer, that's the best thing going, it's the best decision that we can make with our lives. We also say this all the time, we want to be a place where you can belong while you're figuring things out, where you can belong before you believe. And so the invitation is always to step in. And so if you have friends that are seeking, that are looking for answers in life, there's a place for them here. If that's where you are, there's a place for you here. And we understand that you're coming from all different places, even when it comes to things like miracles. Do they even happen? Do they even exist? But what I want to encourage you, and even as you see that story and hear that, if that's where you are, continue to open up your eyes, continue to open up your heart, and continue to look around and just kind of say, where are these miracles and are they happening around me? And I think that you'll start to see some things that maybe you haven't seen before. And so last week, we spent time talking about a different kind of miracle, and we said that basically the power of Jesus is greater than the power of storms in your life. If you get a chance to go back and listen to that talk, it's on our website, it's on Facebook there. Today, we're going to talk about what happens when life gets stuck. That's what I want to talk to you about today. I think we all feel at different times in our lives like we're stuck in different places, in different ways, in different patterns, in different relationships in our lives. I spent time right out of college in a town called Winston-Salem. Winston-Salem was about an hour north and northeast of here. I lived there for about 3 years and had a great job, made enough money to survive and to kind of be comfortable. We had a great little house that was in the downtown part of Winston-Salem, really cute little ranch house. We had some friends that we'd begun to meet and make, and life began to be pretty comfortable. Like life began to be pretty good, and we began to kind of find our rhythm, we kind of found our place, and I began to experience some discomfort because I began to feel like I think that I need to be doing something else and heading in a different direction, and I wasn't exactly sure what that meant yet, but I began to realize, okay, what I'm doing right now is not what I want to be doing in the future. I need to begin to take some steps. And yet we were in this place where we were really comfortable. We were in this place where we were beginning to get connected, and yet I was starting to sense, I think it's time to maybe take a step. But I found myself getting stuck. I found myself stuck because I had a job I really liked, we had a community we really liked, and we didn't want to stay. I didn't want to stay, but I didn't know how to leave. You ever felt like that in a place in your life where I don't know, I don't want to stay, but I don't exactly know how to leave? I would call that being stuck. And we all get stuck in different places in our lives. Let me tell you some symptoms of how you know when you're stuck. Like, how do I know when I'm stuck? And let me just give you a couple of possibilities. One of them is this. I grew up in a little subdivision in Raleigh. We had in the suburbs, we had a cul-de-sac in our neighborhood, and I would, when I was a little kid, take my bike down and I would ride around the cul-de-sac, and that was really fun when I was a little kid. I would ride around in circles. So you expend a lot of energy and you don't get anywhere in a cul-de-sac. As I got older, I realized this is not so fun. Like, I would like to come out of the cul-de-sac, and so finally my parents would let me ride out of the cul-de-sac, and we began to ride around the neighborhood. I would find my friends, and all kinds of adventure lay beyond the cul-de-sac. Well, one of the symptoms of being stuck is feeling like you're in a cul-de-sac. It's feeling like I keep expending energy, and I don't feel like I'm getting anywhere. I'm doing the same things over and over and over again. You ever felt like that? Yes, I see a lot of nodding heads. We all have felt that way. Another symptom is that you just don't know what to do next. Like I feel stuck. I don't know what to do next. A third symptom is this. I'm tempted to give up. Like I'm going to give up. I want to give up. I just find myself being tempted to give up in this place in my life. And I need some kind of intervention. I need some kind of, you can call it a miracle if you want to. I need some kind of, even like an extraction. I need somebody to come and pull me out of this situation and drop me somewhere else. That's what it feels like right now. I need an intervention. Maybe you're thinking, I need a miracle. I need God to do something in my life, physically or mentally or emotionally, or maybe even you would say that spiritually. I need a miracle, or at least I need a next step. At least I need to know what is next. Now, there are some places where we get stuck. There's some primary places where I think those are. One of them is in relationships. One of them is in relationships. It's a place where we commonly get stuck. If you have just a general sense of unhealth in certain relationships in your life, but you're not sure what to do, this can be in your marriage, this can be in friendships, students, this can be with friends around you, this can be with people in your family. in relationships, or those are often places where we feel just like stuck, like I'm in a cul-de-sac. I don't know where it's going. It just doesn't feel like we're moving anywhere. You can feel that way in your career. You can feel that way in your job. I know a lot of people who have gotten stuck between certain things. And the between is I'm in between what I really want to do, what I really feel like I'm wanting to do, what I'm really created to do, and this job over here that's paying the bills. And maybe paying them really well. And so I'm kind of stuck. Like I know I've got this going on and it's keeping me comfortable and it's keeping me safe, but my heart is really over here. And yet I'm struggling because I don't know what to do. I don't know how to bridge that gap. I don't know if I should take a leap or if I should just stay put and forget about it or what. That's one place where we tend to get stuck. Another place is this: bad habits or even sinful habits where you continue to try to pull yourself free. You know that this is not good for you. You know it's unhealthy. You know you're doing something that is not helping you very much, but you continue to go back to it, and you keep getting pulled back in. As much as you try to break free of it, it just pulls you back again, and you get defeated, and you begin to feel stuck in a bad habit, stuck in an even sinful kind of place where you are struggling, and it keeps pulling you down. Another place you can get stuck, a fourth place, is your spiritual life. I just feel like I'm stuck spiritually, if that makes any sense. I'm stuck when it comes to me and God. I don't know what to do. And some of you, if you call yourself a Christian, if you're a Christ follower, if you're saying, that's me, it's easy for us to get stuck. It's easy to say, yes, that's true of me, but I don't know where to go from here. I don't know what's going on. I don't know the next step. I don't know if I'm growing. I'm stuck, if I'm honest with you. So with miracles, we can at least agree that miracles are something that we can't do. Miracles are something that you cannot do. Like you can't perform a miracle. God's in charge of miracles, but there are things that we can do to get ourselves unstuck. There are things that we can do before even like the miracle happens. And by the end of our time today, I want to give you 4 things that you can do, 4 practical things that you can do to get yourself unstuck, to free yourself up, to step forward. Because you can't perform a miracle in your life. Only God can do that, and maybe He will. But in the meantime, here's the thing. You don't have to just sit there. You don't have to just give up. There are things that you can do. There are things that I can do when we're feeling stuck to start to pry ourselves free. So I want to tell you a story this morning from the Bible about a guy who was stuck. He'd been stuck for a long time. This guy had been stuck in the same pattern, years for him of physical problems that had affected him. Years that had turned into decades of a physical ailment that had affected him. And he found himself in a cul-de-sac in life doing the same things over and over and over again and expecting different results. You know what that is the definition of, right? Yes, insanity, right? The same thing, expecting different results. Well, he was living in that world every single day of his life. He didn't know what to do next. He had given up a long time ago. And so as we read, I want you to ask a question of yourself. Where am I stuck? Am I stuck? Where am I stuck? And what will it take to get to the next level for me? Let me just ask you to ask that question to yourself as we read this story. So this story comes from the book of John. John's one of the Gospels. I would highly encourage you to read that book, especially if you haven't connected with the Bible in a while. It's a great place to start. Start in John chapter 1 and just start slowly reading through because you're going to get this beautiful picture of Jesus. We're going to look at John chapter 5. And in this Gospel of John, that's kind of, if you look at the whole thing, it's where he begins to turn a corner towards some of the things that Jesus did and some of the interactions he had with people and especially some of the people who weren't too happy that Jesus was around. But Jesus has a unique way of interacting with people, and we're going to see one of those interactions today in this story. So we're in John chapter 5, verse 1 through 6, and you'll see it up on the screen over here. Here's how it starts. It said, sometime later, Jesus went up to Jerusalem for one of the Jewish festivals. These are some of the normal, there were 2 or 3 typical festivals that they would go to Jerusalem for if you were a Jewish person throughout the year. And so he was going up to celebrate one of the Jewish festivals, and it says, now, there is in Jerusalem near the sheep gate a pool. And so we're starting to get some geography here. We're starting to get a lay of the land. There's this pool, which in Aramaic is called Bethesda. Now, the language that they spoke in that day was Aramaic. It wasn't Greek. The New Testament was written primarily in Greek, but they spoke Aramaic, and so it was called Bethesda, and that's surrounded by 5 covered colonnades. The interesting thing to some of us, some of you guys about that, some of you will be like, no big deal. But they discovered this like about 20, 30 years ago. They weren't sure, but in archaeological digs, they discovered where this is in Jerusalem. So when you go to Jerusalem, if you go now, you can actually visit the place where this took place. It's pretty cool. If you look back in the book of Nehemiah, if you really want to dig deep, you go back in the Old Testament book of Nehemiah, it talks about the gates in Jerusalem that were rebuilt. You can figure out, there's one called the Sheep Gate, and it is connected with this story. It's really interesting. So it's all rooted in a real place. And so there's this place called the pool, and here's what happened in that pool. A great number of disabled people used to lie. The blind, the lame, the paralyzed. Now here's what they would do. They believed that this pool that they lied around would help heal them of their infirmities. Like if they had some issues, some physical problems, they believed that, and the legend was that an angel would come in each day and stir the pool. And when that happened, the water would kind of bubble up, and the first person in would experience healing. Everybody else had to wait for the next day. But the first, that was the legend of the day. Interestingly, that wasn't something that the Jewish leadership bought into. It wasn't something that they would have approved of. But like very often happens today, they were combining sort of a local legend with their religion and getting this other thing. And so from a popular perspective, this is what people believed would happen, that they would step into this pool and they would experience healing. And so we got the setup. We got where it is. We got what's going on in this pool. And then one who was there had been an invalid for 38 years. So you've got a guy who was there for 38 years trying to experience this. And when Jesus saw him lying there and learned that he had been in this condition for a long time, he asked him, "Do you want to get well?" Do you want to get well? And you'd think, after all those years, he would have figured out a way to get himself into that pool first. That he would have found a way to make that happen. 38 years, that's a long time. That's longer than the typical lifespan of the person in that day. And he had been there for 38 years. And I would think, saying, "Jesus, really? What do you think I'm doing here? Do I want to get well? What do you think I'm doing? This is where I am. I have spent my whole life here. What do you think is going on?" But how many of us would say yes to that question, do I want to get well, but are really unwilling to change? Our current circumstances, no matter how bad, become comfortable, don't they? Our current situation, no matter how mediocre it is, gets comfortable after a while. I tell our serving teams here, I try to remind them pretty often that this is a gym during the week. Do you know that? You know that because take a deep breath. Like you can sort of smell it. And when we try to do air freshener in here, it's just worse. It's like flowers and sweat mixed together. It's not good. So we just try to air the place out. But we come in here every single Sunday morning and try to create an atmosphere that's welcoming to a church. And that takes some effort. In fact, what happens is this. The longer we're here, like the team members who have been here longer, we miss more things. We don't see some of the things that you see. So if you're new here, you have a real opportunity to help us because a lot of times we just miss some of the stuff because the longer you're in a situation, the less you see, the more comfortable you are. And so we have to come into a place like this and think like a first-timer. I tell our team all the time, let's think like a new person. What do you see? What do you experience? What do you smell? Sorry about the smell, but all the things we can control, right? Like because that happens. We get comfortable under our current circumstances, whatever the case is. Now, this happens to you too when you go into, say, somebody's house for the first time and you're thinking, or maybe you even say it out loud, "Why is it so dark in here?" And they're going, "It's not dark. You really think it's dark in here? I don't think it's dark in here at all. I'm totally used to it." Or, "Why did you paint that color on the wall?" And they're like, "Why? We did that 15 years ago, and I don't even know why anymore." And you see things in a different way. On a more serious note, you might walk into a particular set of relationships or walk into a new relationship or between two people that you're observing, and you might come away asking, why does she let him talk to her that way? Why does that happen? Or you may ask to your friend, why don't y'all talk? Why don't y'all communicate together? Or you may pull your friend aside at some point and say, hey, this is new to me, but why are you still there? Why are you still doing this? We get comfortable in the situations that we are in. You ever watch the show Hoarders? You remember that show, Hoarders? I think I watched, I'm not sure if I made it through even one whole episode because it's so uncomfortable. And it's a show basically about people who hoard everything in their lives. They can't get rid of anything, and so it stacks up around the house to the point where they've got these little pathways, some of them between things that are stacked up in their house, and they just can barely make it. And it's stuff from like 28 years ago that they think they still might use, and so they keep it. Or they fill up rooms, and they'll start opening doors, and there's rooms full of stuff, and you can't get in there. Some of them have warehouses behind the houses that are full of stuff, and the whole show is them walking through and trying to help people get rid of their stuff. The thing with those folks is the same thing that happens to us. You get comfortable in the environment that you're in, and you begin to not see it. And sometimes you need somebody to step in and say, do you want to get well? Jesus said, do you want to get well? Do you really want to get well? It's like, on the one hand, why would he ask that? It's almost insulting. Like, I'm here. Of course I want to get well. But on the other hand, he's been there for 38 years. And Jesus had to ask him that question for a very specific reason. Do you want to get well? Do you really want to get well? We got to be careful to not lose our God-given motivation to get better. Be careful to not lose your God-given motivation to get better. And so here's how the man replied. He says, Sir, I have no one to help me into the pool when the water is stirred. While I'm trying to get in, someone else goes on down ahead of me. And so here you start to get this sense of what he's thinking. 38 years of the same approach to his problems. Let me ask you this. Who wants to be dealing with a problem that you have right now 38 years from now? Can you imagine that? You got a problem today. 38 years, you still got the same problem. I want to deal with mine I want to be done with mine next week. Don't you? But can you imagine 38 years of dealing with the same thing over and over and over again? But the truth is this, if we don't change our approach to our issues, it might be the case. And so you start to see his excuses. He begins to lay out these excuses, and maybe at first they were reasons. And those reasons started to become excuses. No one is here to help me. No one's here to help me, Jesus. I've been here for 38 years. No one's helped me. Someone always gets in front of me. Someone always goes ahead of me. Isn't there, guys, listen, be honest, isn't there safety in maintaining our behavior? Isn't there a safety net? Isn't he putting up this wall of safety around his behavior and saying, this is what I know, this is what I'm comfortable with, this is where I am, this is what's happening, these are my excuses for not getting better. Of course I want to get well, but this is why it's not happening. Jesus, don't you see that? It's safer sometimes to stay where we are. If you have friends, for instance, that your whole relationship with them maybe at some point was based on drinking, like if you have friends that the whole relationship with them is based there, what happens when you stop? You know what typically happens when you stop is that the relationships fall apart because they were based on that one activity that you no longer pursue, and therefore you don't have anything in common with them anymore, and that is why some people stay in. Even though it's negative behavior, even though you know it's not good for you, you stay in because it's easier and more emotionally comfortable to stay there in a tough, bad situation. We don't like risk, do we? We don't like the unknown. We don't like taking these steps. So even the known that's a difficult situation in our minds is better than the unknown stepping outside of it. These excuses that we continue to come up with are the same ones that he began to give to Jesus. How often do our excuses win the day? There's a quote by an author named Annie Dillard. It says this. She says, how we spend our days is, of course, how we spend our lives. That's convicting, isn't it? How we spend our days turns into months, turns into years, turns into our lives. And how this man had spent his days was how he was spending his life. And I think that he was captive to his way of thinking about himself just as much as he was captive to his disability. And so Jesus had to come in a sharp kind of way and rattle that cage. And sometimes I think he wants to do that for you and me as well. Sometimes you need to be shaken up and not be able to see the same things in the same way. You know, following Jesus, yes, it is a process, but it's also sometimes a moment of decision, a moment of interaction, a moment where you respond in a different kind of way. That's what he's inviting this man to. Sometimes it takes admitting our limits, like admitting our own human limits to open ourselves up to the work of a limitless God. It starts there. So Jesus says to him, and this is so direct, I love this. Jesus says to him, "Get up, pick up your mat and walk." Get up, pick up your mat and walk. And this is commanding Jesus. This is the Jesus that is the tell me what to do Jesus, and sometimes we need that. I don't know if you grew up with Jesus, an understanding of him like that. We tend to grow up with safe Jesus, with nice Jesus, with shepherd Jesus, with the Jesus who would never say anything wrong or never be mad or never be that direct. That's not who he is. That's another reason to start to dig into the scriptures for yourself, is because you start to see him for who he really is. And when you start to see him for who he really is, you realize how radical he was and how much he wanted to turn the world upside down on its head. Or I would really say, right side up. But he looks at the man and he knows exactly what he needs to hear. He says, get up, pick up your mat, and walk. Do you know that he wants to make you well? He does. He doesn't want you to be stuck. That is not God's will for your life. But often that's going to take an abrupt change in behavior, and you will have to take a risk. You'll have to take a risk. You'll have to have the conversation that you don't want to have. Or you'll have to start the thing that you're afraid of starting because you don't know how it's going to go. And you're afraid. And it's the unknown. We crave the known. We just do as humans. But everything about faith is about taking risk. And Jesus is coming to call us out of ourselves and into a place of trust and risk and adventure. And there's so much in us that resists that. But you and I are going to have to do some things like taking risks and starting the things you're afraid to start. Maybe it's stopping something you're afraid to stop because it's given you something in your life. It's given you an emotional pull. It's tugging at you. And maybe it's time, though, to stop the thing you're afraid to stop. It might be that it's simply admitting that you can't do this on your own. That life has become unmanageable and you just can't keep it up. Might mean that you ask for help. Might mean that you say, hey, I need some help from my friends. I need to let them in on where I am in my life because I can't do this on my own. I've been trying to figure it out. I've been trying to kind of be strong and I just can't do that anymore. I need some people in my life to help me. It might be that you ask for help from a counselor or a therapist, so you need to go sit down with somebody who can look at you and ask you questions about yourself. You know how healthy that might be for you? I have done it. And it is amazing. And every single person in this room would benefit from sitting with somebody who can just peer into your life with you together and help you ask and answer questions about yourself. You don't have to be fallen into a curb for that to be good for you. Maybe part of stepping out of the cul-de-sac and getting unstuck is simply saying, I need help. And that's different behavior than you've had in the past. Because to this point, maybe you've just tried to do it on your own. You tried to pretend like everything's good and you're a wreck inside. It's okay. It's okay to admit that you can't help yourself, that it's become unmanageable. And I do think that that's part of what this man was doing. He was saying, hey, this is where I am. This is just my life. This is what I see. Jesus, what do you want me to do? Like, I've been trying to get in and I can't get in and I don't see anything beyond this. And it takes somebody from the outside like Jesus to look in and go, hey, this is about, your life can be about more than just this little cul-de-sac you're in right now. And I want you to step out. Sometimes you just need to get up and walk. Like sometimes you just need to get up and you need to start walking. Jesus says, get up, pick up your mat, and walk. Direct Jesus. And sometimes we just need him to be that direct in our lives, don't we? I know that I do. And this is what the story ends with. It says, at once the man was cured. He picked up his mat and he walked. You imagine how comfortable that mat had become to him? I think of a mat like a camping mat, like a bedroll. I went camping with my kids this summer. A friend of mine in this church loaned me a bedroll. It didn't work. And it was like that thin. And I laid on that thing and it was awful. But I can imagine this guy had a mat like that for 38 years and it had become his security blanket after a while. Yes, uncomfortable, but it was his thing. It was what he did every day. He laid it out there. He took it with him. He dragged it around. He brought it out there. He put it down. He picked it back up. He went home and he did the same thing the next day. You know how comfortable those uncomfortable things can get in our lives. Jesus says, no, pick it up, walk, and go. Sometimes we just need to get up and walk. So let me ask you some questions. If you're stuck, here's some questions for you. What are you placing your hope in more than Jesus? Like what are you placing your hope in today that's more than him? What are you placing your hope in? Possibly your success, possibly your degree, possibly where you live, possibly the relationships that you currently have, possibly your financial condition. What are you placing your hope in more than Jesus? Let me ask you another question. Could you give up blank? Fill it in that blank. Could you give up blank if you needed to? Could you give up blank if you needed to? Could you give it up? Could you let it go? Could you let go of that addiction? Could you let go of that mat? Could you let go of whatever it is? Could you give it up if you needed to? What's the state of your soul's health? Like where are you? What's the state of your marriage's health? What's the state of your relational health with people that are significant in your life? Where are you in those places? Are you stuck? Is it time to get up? Let me give you a few things to take with you today. While you're possibly waiting for the miracle to happen, you don't have to just be apathetic. You don't have to just kind of be there and not care anymore. You don't have to just kind of sit and not expect anymore. I think we lose when we begin to not expect God to do something in our lives. And so let me give you some things to do that can help you get unstuck. One of them is this: get motivated. Get motivated. He said, do you want to get well? And you can answer that question today too. Yes or no? Is it yes? Is it no? Is it maybe so? Is it yes or no? Do you want to get well? Can you get motivated? Because the answer to that question, when you begin to answer it, you start to get motivated. You start to realize, I do actually. I do. And I'm stuck here and I'm not happy anymore with where this is. I want it to get better. I want to get well. I want it to go to a different place. Getting unstuck starts with getting motivated. The second thing that it takes on then is not only getting motivated, but you got to get real. You got to get real. The second step is getting real. Be honest with yourself. Be honest with other people around you. Be honest with God. If I'm going to get unstuck, I got to get motivated. I got to get real. That means looking myself in the mirror and saying, here's my situation. Here's my limitations. Let me own this. I believe that God often begins where we end. When we come to the end of ourselves, the end of our limitations, when we put our walls up and we say, this is as far as I can go, this is where it is, this is where I exist, this is the borders of my cul-de-sac, God is saying, I'm going to begin when you step out of it. You don't even know what I'm getting ready to do, but I'm asking you to take a step because I'm just getting ready to get started here in your life. God often begins where we end. But in order for that to happen, you got to figure out where you are, getting real with your situation and saying, this is where I am right now. Be honest with yourself, other people, and God. The third thing is this: get moving. Get moving. Get up. God said, get up. And maybe for you, it's time in certain places in your life to just get up. And you don't have to know the answer. You don't have to know the place that you're going. You don't have to know the next step. It's a great story way back in the book of Genesis with Abraham, when God's calling Abraham, and Abraham didn't really know much about God, and God simply tells him to get up and go. He doesn't tell him where. He just says, go. He said, go to the land I will show you. Doesn't tell him where to go. Doesn't even tell him really what direction to head out. He just says, get up and leave. Get up and go to the land that I will show you. And sometimes for us, it's time to get moving. It's time to get up and go. The fourth thing is this: not only get motivated, get real, get moving, get help. Get help. You very well may be in a place where you need to just say, I can't do this on my own. I need help. You need to tell somebody, you need to invite somebody in to this. This is not like faith in Jesus is not like a solitary sport. It's not a solitary, it's not like golf where it's all up to you. It's a team sport. It's like basketball, it's like football. It's like we are helping each other go down the field together, okay? So this is a team thing. We got to get help. We got to help one another. Would you tell somebody about where you're stuck? Would you ask somebody for help? Sometimes we just need to get help. Some of you might need to just help other people in your life who are stuck. Because if you're not feeling stuck, I guarantee you know some people who are. And so you can either kind of sit on the outside of their life and bring some judgment and go, poor thing, I wish they weren't so stuck. Or you could go get up beside them and say, hey, can I help you? Can I just listen? Can you just tell me where you are? Can you tell me what's going on? I would love to be able to help. It's amazing how far you can go when you're walking with somebody else. Get motivated. These are the things that you can do while you're waiting. Get motivated. Get real. Be honest. Get moving. Get up. And then get help. Ask people to help you in your journey. Let's stop doing this thing where we pretend like everything's okay. And we all know that it's not. And yet we never really get there with people. It'll be so much better when we're able to walk in community together in connection with one another and become unstuck together. Do you want to get well? Do you want to get well? I'm going to pray for us this morning. Would you pray with me? God, maybe for some in the room, there are different answers to that question. Do you want to get well? At the most basic level, there's a spiritual need that we have to reconnect with you. And there's an even intuitive sense that we have that our connection with you has been broken from sin and rebellion and walking away from you. And it's amazing that the offer from you, full of grace and love and compassion, is simply to step into a relationship with you by saying yes. And that's all we have to say. We don't have to get ourselves together. We don't have to make ourselves better without you. You just invite us to come into a relationship with you. And so maybe today for some of us the answer to that question, do I want to get well, is simply a yes. It's a simple word, but it brings unbelievable significance. Because within that word is an admission of our need for you. It's an admission of the fact that I can't do this on my own. It's a desire for a relationship with you. Nothing we can earn, but something that you freely give. So maybe today, for the first time, some are saying yes to you. There are others in this room who, God, we just need to become unstuck. Maybe as we read this story, it's been being revealed to us that there are places in our life where we're stuck. God, would you help motivate us today? Would you help us take the next step? Maybe it's not that we know all the next steps, but it's just the next step to take. Would you just show that to us, whether it's, I just got to talk to this person, I just got to make this phone call, I've just got to send this email, I've just got to invite this other person into my life, I've got to take a risk. Maybe it's, I've got to stay when I feel like going, God, I've got to just commit to staying. Maybe it's, I got to go even though I feel like staying. What is your next step, God? And finally, God, there are people in our lives who we know are stuck and we've struggled to know how to help them. Would you give us the courage and the words to be able to encourage someone else today to step out of the cul-de-sac of life and into all that you have for them? Help us to know how to do that with people that are around us. Thank you, God, for your word. Thank you that you want us to walk with you and into life and away from the stuck places in our lives. We pray this in the mighty, mighty name of Jesus. Amen.